I was setting a needle when the rain shifted from mist to a fine, steady drizzle that made the tents along the Willamette shine like fish scales. Saturdays at the market had their own metronome, the busker's guitar, the hiss of espresso, the soft murmur of tourists fingering hand-dyed yarn. I liked the quiet corner near the river where my quilting frame could sit steady and I could show people the rhythm of handwork. Each stitch is a breath, I told anyone who would pause long enough.
If you rush your braiding, you'll tangle your thread. If you breathe long, your needle walks through.
Most smiled and moved on to the soap maker or the glassblower. Some stayed, brows knitting as they tried the backstitch. I'd guide their fingers, the way my mother had guided mine in a kitchen that smelled like starch and strong coffee. After my husband died, I learned to fill the days with small faithful repetitions: boil water, thread needle, mend, patch, teach. In a city that loved its flannel and its ferns, I made a life from cloth. He came like a pause in the noise. Not for what he wore, though the charcoal overcoat and wool scarf fit him as if they'd been made by a friend who prized seams, but for the way he stood, hands in his pockets, watching my needle move. He didn't speak until I tied off a thread and snipped it. "You catch the exhale," he said. His voice had the low, even quality of someone used to being heard. Most people are in love with the inhale. The taking in.
You respect the letting go.
I looked up. Silver at the temples.
Eyes the color of wet cedar.
People like to project wisdom onto anyone with good posture and good hair. I'd learned that the hard way. Still, I couldn't help smiling.
Kilt live in the species, he said.
Between fabric and batting, between what shows and what is tucked inside.
Ça m'abrisse.
He glanced at the quilt in progress, indigo triangles meeting pale linen, a river of light the width of a finger. And same as the body. I work with that. Not with cloth, unfortunately. With rhythms.
Yoga?
I teased, and he laughed, a single syllable that didn't break the air so much as warm it. Herbal therapeutics, he said.
I'm Victor Hale.
He offered a card, matte and heavy, the name Hale Botanica pressed in a ferny green. We make formulations that help people keep their rhythms: sleep, focus, recovery. Most of them are based on my grandmother's kitchen pharmacy, with a little modern rigor grafted on. Evelyn Hart, I said, shaking his hand because it felt rude not to. His fingers were warm. I teach quilting at the community center during the week.
Out here, on Saturday, il remisel fouad beguinees mans look like.
I suspect you don't need the reminder. His eyes crinkled. I brought something. Not a sales pitch, he added quickly, as if he knew he'd stepped onto a thin board between riverbanks. He pulled a small thermos from his bag, unscrewed the lid, and the scent drifted up: ginseng, licorice, something floral I couldn't place.
My version of astedianti.
When a surgeon friend tells me her fingers feel like hummingbirds by the third bypass of the day, this is what she drinks. I'm not operating, I said, but there was no barbed humor in it. I was curious. He poured an inch into a paper cup and offered it.
The it liquid my finger through the tin wall.
I sniffed. It wasn't the sharp medicinal punch I associated with Chinatown apothecaries and my own occasional insomnia experiments. It was gentler, with a sweetness that lingered at the back of the tongue. Just a sip, he said. The tea moved across my palate like a sentence that knew where it was going. There was bitterness for a heartbeat, then warmth behind the ears, then a long low aftertaste that reminded me of cedar closets and rain-wet sweaters.
He set the cup down.
It's quiet, I said. If that makes sense. It does. He capped the thermos. Your work is quiet too. Even this pattern, half-square triangles, very shaker, makes noise only if you force it. Half-square triangles are my truce with perfection, I said. They pretend to be simple. They're not. We stood there for a moment in the space that follows a true thing. The busker slid into another song. Across the aisle, Carol waved, eyebrows lifted. Who's the gentleman? I shook my head, and she slipped back into her cloud of hand-dyed roving, a knowing smile tucked in. Portland is kind to people who work with their hands, Victor said. It's less kind to their wrists. If you ever want to try a blend meant for artisans, not the stuff we sell by the pallet to wellness stores, let me know. He tapped the card. And if you ever need help navigating all the new security nonsense, we have a side project that helps older folks filter scam calls without cutting them off from their people. My mother got burned last year. We built an app out of spite. Out of spite, I repeated, smiling. That's honest. Spite can be ethical, he said. Sometimes it's just love with teeth. He didn't overstay. He bought a small hand pie from the baker next to me, asked if he could watch the demo for a few minutes, and did. When I packed up, he was gone, replaced by a young couple arguing amiably about whether to buy a quilted baby blanket even though they didn't have a baby. Rain beaded on the clear plastic over my frame. Carol helped me fold the tent. Name, she said, as we wrangled the stubborn leg. Smile like that and a scarf that expensive. If he's not trouble, he's a painting.
Victor Ale, he said. Ale Botanica.
Her face did a small, calculating shift. He sponsors the Botanical Garden Gala. Also the Seeing Eye Dog program. Depending on who you ask, he's either a saint or a marketing ecosystem. People are allowed to be two things, I said, because I wanted it to be true for the living as much as for the dead.
Carole let it sit. Atome, my appartement Windows m'aide à Theater of the Rhin.
I set the day's fabric on the ironing board so it would forgive me tomorrow. My hands were steady, but when I sat, I felt a pleasant heaviness at the base of my skull, as if someone had turned down the dimmer. It wasn't unwelcome. Grief had rewired my sleep years ago. I didn't hate a little quiet. Still, I put water on and made my own tea, peppermint, a bully in the right ways, to chase it. Maya called at 8, as she often did when her clinic nights ran short. Did the market treat you kindly? She asked, and I could hear the gummy tired in her vowels. It did. Sold 2 pillows to a man who claimed to be starting over at 63. People say truer things to strangers, she said. It's why therapy works half the time. I told her about Victor in the same tone I might use for a new bolt of fabric. She listened the way she always did, without inserting her job between me and my story. A formulation for steady hands, she said finally. I'll take a placebo-controlled trial over a thermos any day, but I also love your hands. It was one sip, I said. And I like my hands too. Good. And maybe don't download any apps he recommends until I read the fine print. There was a time when that would have put me on the defensive. I was 58, not 88. I'd survived a house fire and a cancer scare and the world's sudden insistence that women over 50 become wallpaper. But Maya's caution had never been a leash. It was a net we had both agreed to tie. Deal, I said. Go to bed. You too. I didn't. I stitched 3 more rows of triangles, each a small argument with gravity. The kettle clicked off and on again as if to prove it was still there. When the quiet got too loud, I turned on the radio to a show where people called in to confess small things. I pocketed the hotel soap. I said I liked his mother's pie. We love a low-stakes sinner in this country. The next morning, a pale sun lifted itself above the east bank, ghostly as a child behind a curtain. I taught 3 women to make their first 9 patch at the community center, hands on hands, breath on breath. We talked about fabric stores and rising rents and the coffee shop that sold toast for $9. After class, there was a card at the front desk with my name on it.
No return address.
Inside, a note in tidy, masculine print.
Thank you for letting me watch the exhale.
If you ever want to see our greenhouses, I'd be honored to trade a tour for a lesson. V. I held the card longer than I meant to. There are times when feeling seen is as dangerous as it is sweet. There are also times when it's simply sweet. I tucked the card into my wallet, behind the grocery list. On Tuesday, we met for coffee in a shop that had more ferns than chairs. He arrived on time and chose the table by the window, but not so close that we'd be cold each time the door opened. We talked about quilts and palms and the ethics of selling calm in bottles. He asked more questions than he answered. When he offered tea again, I said no, and he didn't push. Maybe another time, he said easily. You should come out to Lake Oswego. We're doing a small event for artisans next month. No clipboards. Just people who like to make things. People who like to make things, I repeated. He smiled like someone who had just felt his own words fit. When I walked home, the rain had decided to be honest and came down in sheets. At the corner, a school bus exhaled children and steam. I stood under a maple and watched it breathe. I'd long ago learned that danger didn't announce itself with violins. It eased in like fog. It wore gifts like scarves. It asked you to sit and to sip. I also knew that suspicion can be its own tyranny if you let it rule your blood. At my door, I shook out my umbrella and for reasons I couldn't name, counted my keys twice. Then I laughed at myself, wiped the water off my floor with a towel, and set a fresh bobbin.
The trait du med.
The needle rose and fell. I let the rhythm claim me, the way it always had, and I tucked the aftertaste of herbal sweetness into the pocket of my day where I kept anything I wasn't ready to decide. By the time October leaned hard into rain, Victor's card had settled into my wallet like a bookmark I wasn't ready to use. Then Carol shoved me gently. Go see the greenhouses, she said, the way you tell a friend to try on the dress she keeps touching.
Worst case, you get a story.
Best case, you get a patron who won't haggle over your time.
El Botanicaes campus sat just beyond l'Ecoswego where the water made a polite mirror of pneumonia and old trees.
The main building was glass-sided, all clean lines and potted ferns that looked like they'd been interviewed before hiring. The artisan thing was smaller than I'd feared. No panel discussions, no performative yoga, just 15 of us who made things with our hands, a luthier with varnish on his cuffs, a ceramicist with clay half-moons under her nails, a weaver with a laugh you could see from across the room. Victor moved through the group with that same even gravity, introducing people as if he were introducing notes in a chord. He found me at the periphery, where I prefer to live at events. You came, he said, not a question or a victory lap, just an observation he placed gently at our feet between us.
Canistil you for 10 minutes?
The propagation house is warmer than this and also quieter. It was. Humid air kissed my cheeks, rows of small lives leaned toward grow lights in orderly hunger. He talked about stress signaling, about how plants make their own pharmacopoeia when the world leans on them too hard. The trick, he said, is to ask for their music without stripping the tree. He wasn't coy about commerce.
Il respectait dette.
He poured a small cup from a tiny lab pitcher and offered it the way a priest offers a host, not commanding, not casual, just present. Diplomatic sip, I said, and he smiled. This blend was different, bright at the top, almost citrus, with something grounding that made my shoulders drop a fraction. Chisandra, he said, guessing my question. And a little passion flower. Artists and surgeons are the only two groups that don't fight me about it. I didn't linger. I don't linger around things that can tip my balance. We rejoined the group. We watched the weaver run her fingers over flax like a mother pushing hair from a child's eyes. We ate small squares of something that tasted like almonds and philanthropy. When I left, Victor walked me to the door, but not farther. You can say no, he said, apropos of nothing and very much something. To any of it. Including me. I drove home through lanes slick as eel backs, the bridge lifting me just high enough to see the river's patience. I felt good. That was the truth. The other truth, halfway up my stairs, I had to stop and put my hand on the banister because a gentle tiredness had folded itself over my shoulders like a shawl. It wasn't unpleasant. It also wasn't mine. I made peppermint tea, bossy and honest. I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to recall the weaver's last name. It floated just out of reach, then snapped back into place, Hargrove. I exhaled and told myself I was 58 and allowed to have a tired afternoon. The next week Victor asked if I wanted to walk in Forest Park between showers. We did, 20 minutes before the moss let go of last night's rain and sent it down our necks. He kept pace with my shorter stride and didn't turn conversation into confession. He asked about my students, my 9-patch women, my refusal to quilt by machine. I asked him about his grandmother's kitchen pharmacy. Mostly stubbornness, he said. And a kind of listening I'm still trying to learn. On the way back to the car, he handed me a box the size of a paperback. Not a sales pitch, he said again, reading my flinch. A phone. One of ours. We built a suite for my mother after a scammer took half her savings. It defaults to whitelisting contacts. You add who you love. It lets them through. It flags everything else and asks twice. I'm not your mother, I said, too quickly. He didn't wince. I know. Think of it as a raincoat you can take off. If you hate it, you can give it back or put it in a drawer and forget I exist.
Jelle leven comme over en del pinscrew at very screwed.
That made me laugh in spite of myself. The phone was handsome in a way electronics seldom are, matte, with a weight that felt like honesty. My own was old enough that taking a picture in low light made everyone look like they were haunting themselves. Let me move your contacts for you, he offered. I'll set the filter to medium.
You'll still get the junk if you want the junk.
He was deft, respectful with his hands. I watched him the way I watch men touching women's sewing machines, ready to swat but willing to be surprised. When he left, the screen was brighter than my old one. Carol texted 15 minutes later, "Did you see the news about the yarn store on 23rd? I replied yes, then called her. The call rang and rang, then clicked to voicemail. Later she waved it off as spotty service on her end. Maya pinged me with a meme about coffee worship gone too far.
He looked out loud.
It felt normal. For a few days it was. Victor didn't crowd. He sent a photo of his grandmother in front of a stove the color of old enamel. He showed up at the market with a thermos, offered, didn't insist. I took a sip because I had a student with a binding emergency and needed to keep my patience from fraying. After lunch, sitting at my frame, I felt my head agree to a nap my mind had not scheduled. I woke 20 minutes later with my needle still in my hand and the radio telling me it had been telling someone secrets while I slept.
Yad droled, atteint line on my wrist like a simgon slightly crooked.
I wiped it away and finished the row. Carol came by the shop with a pie she pretended she'd bought because she knows I won't let her buy me pies. I saw your friend on the news, she said, not quite daring to call him mine. Victor Hale at the Botanical Garden Gala, telling the mayor how gratitude can be a policy. Did you know he was married twice? No, I said, because I didn't and because the question sat on a shelf between gossip and warning. First wife died, she said, then added quickly, cancer I think. Second wife. There are whispers. I don't have the whole shape. I'm just a crow with a shiny thing. I wanted to be angry at rumors. I also wanted to be the woman who doesn't ignore a glint because she's tired of being a crow. People can be two things, I said again, softer this time. And rumors can be three. I texted Maya that night, hypothetical question, what's the line between care and control in tech? She called back immediately. The line is whether it increases or decreases your world. Tools that make you bigger are care. Tools that make you smaller are control. Why? Victor gave me a phone, I said, and she did a pleased but wary sound. Let me look at it next time I'm over. And if an app asks for permissions that involve your soul, say no. It only wanted my contacts and my patience, I said. I gave it both. 2 days later, I noticed that my voicemail notifications had gone silent. Not off exactly, quiet in a way that made me doubt my ears. I opened settings and found nothing sinister. The Guardian mode Victor had installed sat there like a well-behaved dog. The spam filter sat at medium. I told myself that if evil were this easy to hide, my ex-in-laws would have stayed out of prison longer. Victor asked if I wanted to come out to Lake Oswego for an evening. A few of us are cooking, he said. The weaver whose last name you forgot, Hargrove, will be there, which is good because I forgot her first name. I said yes with conditions. No staying late, I said. My students the next morning can smell wine. He laughed.
Thionly, scoutet sonore.
The house was what you would expect a man like him to live in, more glass than wall, the lake performing its trick of making you feel both important and small. The kitchen was a stage and a sanctuary. He handed me a cutting board, and we made a salad that tasted like it had never met a fridge. He poured tea for everyone and something that wasn't tea for people who needed it. I took 3 sips and stopped. It wasn't defiance. It was practice in saying enough. After 9, people thinned and the house returned to itself.
Victor walked me to my car.
I'm not trying to move your furniture, he said, voice low so it didn't carry to whatever was listening. I like your life where it sits. If I ever seem to be rearranging it, I give you permission to throw a shoe at me. Careful, I said.
Yav goudem.
On the way home, my new phone lit with a call from a number I recognized and didn't, Carol's landline, which she only uses during storms. I swiped to answer, and the call vanished. I tried her back. The line clicked and then did the new, modern nothing that is worse than a busy signal because it pretends to be polite. At a red light, I watched my own face in the black mirror of the windshield and saw a woman who was trying very hard to be smarter than her hope. When I got in, the apartment smelled like cotton and the last of the day's rain. I set the kettle on. The phone chimed, Victor, a text, thank you for trusting me with an evening. Sleep well.
I set the phone face down. The kettle sent. I brewed peppermint and dealt the mug under my nose like a talisman.
In my throat, a small weight settled, the kind that used to come at 3 a.m. when my husband's side of the bed was cold and the city made sounds that were not for me. I stood at the window and counted the lights on the hill until the weight redistributed itself into something I could name: caution, not fear. The next morning I woke before the alarm, that little pleasure that feels like a win. I checked my phone out of habit. No missed calls, no voicemail. A message from Maya with a link to an article about elder fraud and a heart emoji. I replied with a photo of my morning light. Then I threaded a needle and told it, as always, to walk true. The rain began again, not because of me or in spite of me, but as the city's way of reminding us that softness can be relentless. I pinned a strip of bias binding and practiced the smallest, hardest art I know, deciding what to let in, and what to let pass under the door without a welcome. By November the rain had settled into a discipline I could almost set a clock by, and Victor drifted into a discipline of his own. He learned the hours when I taught at the community center and the hours when I didn't. He learned the small domestic choreography of my day, when the kettle sighed, when the radio came on, when the light slid across my floorboards like a slow, bright hand. Use my studio by the lake, he said one morning, hands around a paper cup as if warming them on an idea. You won't have to break down your frame every day. There's a wall of north light. You can leave things out and come back to them the next morning without the building staff moving your pins. It was a seduction tailored to a woman who counts her needles at night. I said I'd try it once or twice. We drove to Lake Oswego between showers. The studio was a glass room off the main house. The lake stretched beyond it like a sheet waiting to be basted. He had already set a table the exact height I like, a chair that didn't bite my lower back, lamps that could be dialed from dawn to noon on a knob. It felt, dangerously, like care. I'll be around, he said, pointing toward the kitchen. But the house will pretend I'm not. If you need anything, ask. That first day I brought only a small quilt top, the one with the indigo triangles and the river of light. I meant to work for 3 hours, to say thank you and leave.
At noon he stood in the room walked a little underme.
I made lunch, he called, as if lunch had volunteered for the job. The salad was simple, the soup respectful, the tea predictable and polite. Half a cup, he said, a phrase as friendly as it was precise. After I drank it, I stitched for 40 minutes that felt like 20 and then blinked and found that 20 had somehow been 60. Not asleep exactly, more like a soft gray tarp pulled over part of my afternoon. When I left, the air outside felt thin and factual. My phone showed no missed calls, no voicemail, as if the day had been perfectly behaved in my absence. The second day, Victor wasn't in the studio when I arrived. A tiny chime sounded when I opened the door, pleasant, untroubling, the sound good hotels make when they want you to feel watched without feeling watched. In the ceiling corners, near where the glass met wood, I noticed small black dots with green pinpricks that blinked every so often like patient insects. I told myself even artist studios get robbed, even nice men install cameras to keep honest people honest. At 11, Victor appeared with the cups. 8, 1 and 6, he said, almost joking.
It's how we keep my steady.
I'm not a dosing schedule, I said lightly, but I took a sip. It tasted like warmth held by a bowl you can't quite see. After lunch I answered a text from Carol, a blurry photo of a sweater she'd rescued from the thrift store and meant to be my winter project. When I tried to call her, the phone hummed and then folded the call into silence. A banner popped up that I didn't remember enabling. Guardian mode is protecting you from unknown lines. Add to trusted contacts? I pressed add and nothing happened. The ad was a door that looked like a door but was only paint. In the hallway, a tall man with an earpiece drifted past and paused just long enough to be polite. Tom, he said, which is what all men who stand in doorways for a living seem to be named. If you need to take a walk later, we've got a lovely path just within the property line.
Réal aux clives, note plastique.
I smiled and thanked him. After years in cities, I had learned to be kind to men whose job description sits somewhere between guardian and guard. On the third day, Maya texted, near Portland for a consult. Can I swing by and hug your bones? I sent the address before I thought about it. Some things you don't filter. She arrived in a gray coat and a nurse's sneakers that made no apologies. She hugged me and then stepped back with a clinician's scan disguised as a niece's gaze. You look both good and tired, she said, which covers a multitude of sins. Her eyes moved across the studio, north light, the glass, the black dots with green eyes. New space. Borrowed, I said. Generous. Victor materialized with the at-11's tray. Maya, he said, as if they knew each other, as if he had been expecting a test and was pleased to sit it. I've heard about you. We don't deserve the clinicians we get. Most days I agree, Maya said, dry as the edge of winter. He poured 2 cups and set them down. He did not set one before her. He set one before me and one before himself. Just a half, he said, and waited with the practiced patience of a man who knows the theater of consent. Maya watched my mouth. I took a small mouthful and let it be a small mouthful. What's in it? She asked, as if she were asking whether the rug was wool. Trade secret, he said. But nothing I wouldn't give my mother. That answer made it through a lot of boardrooms, she said.
Dit make it trou en IRB.
He smiled, the smile that says calm yourself without saying it. We're not a hospital. We make supplements. Supplements that interact with GABA receptors are still acting on the brain, she said evenly. People deserve specifics. He leaned against the doorframe and did not lean too hard. Specifics are lovely. Specifics also get stolen.
Evelyne knows chic en séno.
I know, I said quickly, because I did, and because the thinnest part of me wanted to protect him from her and her from him. It helps my hands slow down. It keeps me from muscling the stitch. Maya set her bag gently on the table.
Mais I borrow the restroom.
In the hallway she wasn't gone long enough to pee. When she came back, she hugged me again, too brief to be only a hug. I'll be back in an hour, she said to me. To Victor, nice to meet you. He inclined his head. You too. She texted 10 minutes later, if you can, save me a pinch of the dried blend. If wet only, a teaspoon in a clean bag.
Don't change anything else today.
And don't take more than a sip. After she left, I stitched and then I didn't. I closed my eyes and opened them and a half hour had gone missing like a button in a laundromat. When I stood to stretch, I felt the edges of my day blur, like the air above a stove. I told myself I was fine.
When you tell yourself you're fine, sometimes you are.
When I went to the kitchen to return my cup, Victor looked up from a laptop and filled the silence with good manners.
How is the light for you in the afternoon?
I can add a shade if it gets too blunt. It's fine. I set the cup down, rinsed it, left it upside down to dry.
On the counter, a small label jar sat open. Chamomilla officinalis, a benign little Latin smiling like a de quoi.
That evening at home, I found a paper bag and later, when no one was looking but me, I scooped 2 teaspoons of the dried leaves from a tin Victor had left by the kettle and slid them into the bag.
My hand shook.
I told myself I was being dramatic. I told myself I was being prudent. Both sentences can rightfully share a mouth. On the 4th day, the house seemed to know me. The door chimed twice and then, a beat later, a softer sound chimed back, a confirmation I was expected. Tom drifted again. We've tightened the perimeter, he said conversationally. Lot of catalytic converter thefts. It's a whole economy. When I stepped onto the patio without thinking, he appeared so swiftly I almost laughed. Careful near the stairs, he said. We just had them washed. At 1, Victor came with lunch and a new bottle that pretended not to be new. For the weekend, he said, casual as weather. You could bring your Saturday students out here sometime. We've got room for 6 frames if we borrow from storage. I like them seeing my apartment, I said.
It calibrates the romance.
He nodded as if that were wisdom and not a boundary. Of course. After lunch I tried to call Carol again, because the sweater in the photo had begun to haunt me in a way only ugly sweaters can. The call clicked, then a small message. This number is not recognized by your safety list. Tap to allow. I tapped. It flashed and then returned to itself, innocent as a child caught with jam. I called Maya instead. The call went through, and she picked up on the first ring. I have your pinch, she said without hello. I'm running preliminary strips. If I'm right, it's not just herbs.
What else?
I asked. Antihistamine derivatives, she said. Low dose, enough to take the edge off. Combine that with sedating botanicals and you can knit someone's day into a blanket they'll nap under without asking. How much are you drinking? Half a cup, I said. I meant it. I thought I did. Don't, she said. Sip if you have to because of the theater, but don't. And text me if you feel off. Dizziness, tunnels, sudden fog.
Document it.
The difference between a net and a leash is documentation. I looked up at the ceiling corners where tiny green pinpricks blinked their agreeable blinks. There are cameras, I said softly. Pointed in. Of course there are, she said. People who say care and mean control like angles. I hung up and paced the studio.
Northlight. The lake beyond, indifferent and immense.
The quilt under my hands, a geometry that should have grounded me. In the reflection on the glass, my face looked like a woman standing in a museum next to a painting she isn't sure she likes. When the chime sounded at 6, my body rose for tea as if it were time for church.
He sat back down.
Victor stepped in, set the cup, did not leave. Half, he said. You worked hard. I brought it to my lips. Maya's text glowed like a lighthouse. Victor's smile glowed like a hearth. I let the tea touch my mouth and then set it down, as if it were too hot. In a minute, I said. He didn't move.
The silence got narrow.
I picked the cup back up and tilted it, letting a little wet my tongue, then coughed so lightly it counted as politeness. He relaxed. He looked at my throat the way doctors look when they want to see if you swallowed your pill. I swallowed nothing but the salt of my own restraint. That night, back in my apartment, I fell asleep on the sofa with the radio murmuring other people's lives. I woke at 2 with my heart beating a different song and a thought in my mouth like a coin. This isn't mine. I texted Maya, tomorrow, can you meet me before he does?
Bring your stubbornness.
She responded with a single word I could feel, always. In the morning my phone showed no messages from anyone but her. Carol's thread sat where I'd left it, unapologetically gray. Outside, the rain returned to its work. I boiled water for peppermint and something in me made me close my door, turn the lock, and then gently lay a chair against it from the inside, not because I was afraid of the world, but to hear how the room sounded with the world held back.
The kettle sang.
I exhaled. I stitched one line with a deliberate, almost exaggerated backstitch, placing each breath where it belonged. Then I put the paper bag with the pinch of leaves in my pocket and waited for my students' laughter to knock at the day, and for Maya's footsteps behind it. Maya showed up at my apartment before 9, rain still threading itself into the gutters like silver floss. She wore the same gray coat and a face that meant business. We hugged, then she went straight for the kitchen table where I'd laid out my phone like a patient. Permission? She asked, already moving her thumbs. Permission, I said. She opened settings I didn't know existed. Guardian mode is more than a filter, she murmured. There's a device management profile here. See?
Admin control.
You can't remove it without the admin passcode. Whose passcode? Whoever installed it, she said, not looking up. Outgoing calls still work, or you wouldn't be able to call me. But inbound is restricted to whitelist numbers. Carol's not on there. And even when you add her, the profile can veto you. I felt ridiculous for feeling betrayed by an object.
Can you take it off?
Not without wiping the phone. And if we wipe it now, it screams that you've drawn a line. She set the phone down. We play along until we don't. Document. I said, because I'd learned the spell. Document, she echoed, and handed me a small notebook with a cover that looked like denim. Time of day, tea amount, symptoms.
OS around.
If you notice any new hardware installed in your life, note it.
Hardware.
I said, and then jumped because someone knocked on my door in that 3-tap rhythm of people who never wonder if they're interrupting.
Victor.
Early. Morning, he said when I opened. He held a paper bag and a small plastic blister pack. I brought those scones you like. And a door sensor, don't panic, it's just a little chime. After the break-ins on Hawthorne, I've been putting them in for friends. You'll barely notice it. I don't need, I began, and Maya stepped between us with the most disarming smile I'd ever seen her deploy. Hi, I'm Maya, she said, hand out. Niece. Clinician. Paranoid, professionally. Thank you for thinking of her safety. Victor's eyes did that tiny narrowing that never happens to saints. He recovered. Of course. He lifted the sensor like a magician showing an empty hand. It's dumb tech.
No Wi-Fi.
Just a ding when the door opens. If it bothers you, we pull it off. I could have said no. I wanted to. Instead, I watched his hands as he peeled the backing and pressed the two halves into place, the magnet on the door, the sensor on the jamb. He tested it. Ding. There, he said. Annoying enough to deter. Not enough to make you feel managed. When he left, Maya leaned her forehead against the door for a second as if listening to the wood. That's not dumb tech, she said quietly. It's not smart sentient either, but it's not innocent. It changes the music of your house. Every opening announces itself. It's a ding, I said, and heard it as a sentence and as a symptom. She squeezed my hand.
Stay on your routine. Don't change your class.
If he tries to shrink your world, push back gently. I'm going to drop the sample. If I don't text back by evening, assume I'm fighting with a lab tech. At the lake that afternoon, Tom did his polite drift as I came up the path.
Afternoon, ma'am.
Be careful near the dock. It's slick when the moss gets confident. I'll keep to the path, I said. In the studio the chime twice and then soft chimed again, recognizing me. The cameras blinked their green pinpricks. At 1, Victor brought lunch and said, I've been thinking. There's a lot of petty crime downtown lately. Maybe take a rest from the community center.
Bring your les désirs.
I'll put up long tables. You won't have to lug your frame. They like the bus ride, I said. It's part of their friendship. I worry, he said. I know that's not a sexy verb, but there it is. Worry about your mother, I said, and he laughed, as if I'd absolved him of a small sin. At 3 I asked to walk the perimeter to clear my head. Tom fell into step without falling into step. I'll just shadow, he said. You wouldn't believe how fast people go when they see a gate. At the ridge above the lake, I paused. The water was a sheet of beaten pewter. Somewhere across it a boat engine turned over and coughed. When I angled toward the gate, Tom's hand hovered in the space where a touching hand would be. We've had delivery issues, he said lightly. It's better to avoid the road. Liability. Limit turned to walls so cleanly, I almost admired the workmanship. The rain took a breath and then, around 6, returned as if someone had opened a trapdoor in the sky. I was wrapping my quilt top when Victor's phone rang. He stepped into the doorway to take it, then back in, his face rearranged into concern that wasn't about me.
Supply chain mess.
A pallet went missing between the lab and the distributor. I need to put eyes on it or the night crew will go rogue. I'll be back in an hour.
Do you want me to leave?
I asked. Asking felt like a courtesy, telling would have felt like a scene. Stay, he said. You're safer here than on I-5. Tom will be outside. You'll hear the chime if anyone comes in. He left in a rush that was almost flattering.
The house sighed.
The chime in the studio said I existed.
I stod veristi until heard the garage door go down and the rain swallow the sound.
Then I put my palm on my sternum, the way my mother taught me when I was 12, and the neighbor's Doberman ran me to ground. Breathe.
Décide. Go.
The hallway to the main wing was dim, the lights in some eco mode. I moved slowly, not from fear but to keep the chime from scolding. At the end, a door I had always seen closed was now ajar 2 inches, an invitation or an oversight. I nudged it with my knuckle.
Office.
Not a study with leather and portraits, a working room. Shelves of journals and books arranged by a mind that believed knowledge could be contained if you tried.
A heavy desk.
On the far wall, a gray metal file cabinet with a lock the size of a thumbnail and the aura of a hospital supply closet.
Don't, en hall des versions off me said softly in my head.
Do, said another, the one who has outlived everything by asking the next question. I checked the desk drawers with the dull efficiency of someone who has had to find wills and insurance folders in the dark. Pens, business cards, a drawer of cables braided like black snakes, a caddy of teas with labels in a hand that was tidy, masculine, impatient. In the last drawer, taped to the underside of the top panel, a small key lay flat as if pretending to be wood. I pried it off and my hands went slick. I wiped them on my jeans. The key slid into the lock with a click that sounded as loud as a slammed door. The rain held its breath for me. In the top drawer, files lined up with a neatness that made my skin go cold. Each spine had a name and a date range in a careful black script.
Elena Moore 2014-2017. Doris King 2017-2019. Nina Alvarez 2021-2024.
Names I didn't know and the feeling that I did. I pulled Helena's. Inside, a photograph candid of a woman in her 60s at a farmer's market, the kind you'd snap if you loved her or if you were testing a lens. A page titled Protocol, Initial Titration. Below it columns, Week 1, 2 mg equivalent. Week 2, increase 15% if daytime somnolence tolerated. Notes in the margin, contact reduction progressing. Observe swallow, patient resists at dinner. Introduce safety device to minimize outside stimuli. The last pages were Xeroxes, obituary, then a death certificate that used the words self-inflicted in a font so tidy it made me want to bite something.
Doris. Nina.
The same anatomy, the notes more efficient. A line underlined twice, final staging, plausible cardiac event versus suicidal ideation, choose by season. I was suddenly so cold I thought I would break my teeth. The last file had my name.
Evelyne Hart 2025.
The dash was an arrow pointing at me. The first page, me in the market, my needle at my lips, eyes almost closed, the way I look when I'm tying off a knot with my teeth.
The second, me in the lake studio, back to the Northlight. The third, me asleep on the sofa, a sliver of droll glistening like a confession. Protocol, engagement, 4 weeks. Initiate low dose.
Reinforce care narrative.
Digital isolation, gardien mode déploie octobre 2014.
My stomach clenched. Below, increase 15% if suspicion subsides, maintain at 10% if niece presence persists. And then for words I had to read 3 times before my brain let them through, insurance benefit scenario pending. I don't know how long I stood there with my hand on a paper, so thin it could not possibly hold the weight of what it said. When my hands started to work again, they worked like a clerk's. I took out my phone, turned off the flash and the shutter sound, and photographed each page from corner to corner, checking the edges, making sure the dates were legible. My breath sounded like someone else's. I sent them to Maya without a caption because there was nothing to say that did not cost me more than I had on hand. The little sending bar crawled, stalled, then slid to the end. Delivered. I put every paper back in its file, every file in its slot. I wiped the desk with the flat of my palm and then wiped my palm on my jeans. I retaped the key where I'd found it, cursing softly when the tape didn't want to be faithless twice. I left the door the way it had been, whisper open, and walked back down the hall, shoes barely touching the runner. When I reached the studio, I sat and stitched a line that didn't need stitching because my hands didn't know what else to do.
The garage Dortmund.
The chime announced and then apologized. Victor's footsteps came as if he'd practiced not to sneak. He stepped into the studio, rain freckling his hair at the temples. False alarm, he said. The palette was scanned twice.
The night crew panicked.
His eyes skimmed my face like a doctor's eyes skimming a chart. You okay? Fine, I said, and heard the lie and heard the survival in it. I cleaned up. I thought I'd leave the frame as is. Leave it, he said gently.
It belong here.
He stood there a second too long, then touched the back of the chair as if testing its sturdiness and walked away. When the house went quiet again, my phone buzzed against my thigh. Maya, received. Backing up.
Do not confront.
Do not drink. I'm contacting APS and detective.
Morale.
We move soon. Code if in danger, ask me about the blue quilt. Breathe. I turned the cup on the table so the handle faced the door. I adjusted the lamp a millimeter. I stood up, turned off the lamp, turned it on again. Outside, Tom's shadow slid past the patio like an obedient cloud. In the ceiling corners, the green pinpricks blinked at their patient interval. For the first time since I met him, I was grateful for Victor's discipline. I knew his 8, his 1, his 6. I could dance around them without stepping too loud. On my way out, the door sensor dinged with an innocence I wanted to pick up and hurl into the lake. I said goodnight to Tom, who touched the brim of a cap that didn't exist. In my car, I let my head fall against the steering wheel and whispered to the half-finished quilt in the back seat, "We're going to bind this clean." The rain kept faith. The city received me. At home, I pushed my chair against the door, not as a barricade but as a sentence. You do not come in because you are not invited. That night's sleep came like a bad houseguest, late and smelling of smoke. I woke at 3 to my phone's dim glow and a message from Maya, "We have enough to knock. Be exactly yourself tomorrow." If he installs anything else in your life, say you'll think about it. If he pushes tea, sip and spill. Noon, listen for 3 short honks. If you can step out, step out. If you can't, I'll come in. I typed OK and erased it and typed it again. Then I set the phone face down and lay in the quiet until my heartbeat slowed to a rhythm I recognized. When it did, I put the notebook on my chest and wrote without turning on the light, 816, ding, green lights file, my name with a dash. Then I set the pen aside and closed my eyes. Somewhere in the building, someone laughed in their sleep. The city held its breath, and for the first time in days, I made myself exhale all the way to the bottom. I woke to rain combing the street into neat dark rows and a message from Maya. Preliminary panel suggests antihistamine derivatives plus sedating botanicals, low dose but cumulative, keep documenting, do not escalate. She added a time, noon tomorrow. 3 short honks. Leave your phone if you can. Pack light. I made peppermint and wrote in the denim notebook.
8, half cup. 1, half cup.
6, sip and spill.
Ding, door, studio, door again. Green blinker, two corner, one above the door. Fil cabinet, top drawer Elena, Doris, Nina, bottom me.
My name with a dash. Insurance scenario pending. It looked like someone else's handwriting. It was mine. Victor texted at 8:05, roads are slick, let me drive you. He knew that offering safety was the same as offering leverage, but he always made it look like a blanket, not a rope. I answered, I'll take the bus, it keeps me honest. He replied with a thumbs up, the modern benediction. At 8:30 the door sensor did its new little bell and I remembered I hadn't given him a key. He must have knocked just as I was turning the knob, so the timing felt like choreography. He stood there with a paper bag and a thermos. Illicit scones, he said, smiling. I bribed the baker with a donation to her roof fund. I already made tea, I said, holding up my mug like proof of life. Then I'll pour mine and we'll toast to redundancy, he said, and waited in my kitchen as if kitchens were public parks. He poured. He watched. I took a sip big enough to register and small enough to tuck under my tongue. He looked at my throat again, and I tried not to think about people who polish glass for a living. Busy day? He asked. Classes at 10, I said. Then I'll be at the studio. Good, he said. I'm on site this afternoon. We can align at 1. He left, and I stood at the sink and spit the mouthful into a wad of paper towel, the way a child spits out cod liver oil. I felt foolish, and also like a spy who just earned her first badge in not dying. The community center smelled like floor wax and pencil shavings and the restorative arrogance of women trying something new. I showed Linda how to square a block without bullying it, and when she asked why anyone binds a quilt by hand anymore, I said because some things deserve ceremony. The door sensor dinged when I returned home to switch bags and it dinged again when I left, the house announcing me to itself. I put my phone on the table, stared at it until it felt like a mouth, and slid it into the kitchen drawer under my measuring spoons.
If I forgot, I could say was human.
Lake Oswego received me with its tidy lanes and its evergreen discretion. Tom drifted into my path. We're issuing visitor badges, he said, with the smiling seriousness of an airline gate agent. Insurance, he added, the American incantation. The studio chimed hello twice and then again as if remembering its manners. At 1, Victor arrived with lunch and with someone else. This is Kendra, he said. She's one of our nurse consultants. We've been doing check-ins with anyone who's on the artisan protocol.
Nothing invasive.
Just making sure we're helping, not hindering. Kendra wore scrubs the color of a calm sea and a smile you'd trust with a vein. May I? She asked, and before I had fully said yes, she had a cuff around my wrist and a pulse oximeter pinching my finger. Your pressure's pretty. 68 and a choir, she said, dropping numbers like compliments. Any dizziness? Nausea?
Unusual dream.
Only the usual ones, I said. The ones where I try to run and feel like I'm moving through honey. Honey's not the worst, she said, cheerful.
Have you been sleeping?
I sleep like a woman with a notebook, I said. Enough to know what I wrote. She laughed and packed away her gentle instruments. We like to make sure the blends aren't running away with anyone, she said, glancing at Victor. People forget to hydrate in winter.
Dette salve the battle.
Half, Victor echoed. He set a cup within reach, not in hand. Half a cup, he said, which had become like please in our small grammar. Kendra left with the efficiency of someone who never overstays. I lifted the cup, let the steam fog my upper lip, and set it down with the credulity of a woman who intends to drink later. Victor didn't press. He never pressed where he could coerce with time. After lunch I tried to call Carol again, stubborn as a terrier. The phone wasn't there to obey me. Even reaching for it felt like rehearsing a lie. I pulled a yellow legal pad from the studio drawer and wrote Carol's number with a real pencil, the way we used to write our first phone numbers on the inside of our sneakers in case we forgot our bodies. I told myself I'd call from the landline in the building lobby on my way home, and then remembered this was not a building with a lobby. It was a house with a perimeter. Victor returned at 3 with a box. Sleep kit, he said.
Light alarm, white noise machine, a little spreaded smell like a cabin in Montana.
If your students insist on sending you home late, at least your bedroom will pretend to be kind. Thank you, I said, and meant half of it. He watched me the way you watch a cat deciding if the couch is a good idea. What if we made this simpler, he said carefully. What if you stayed at the lake a few nights a week? Less laddering between places. More continuity for your hands. We could set up the guest room the way you like it.
No obligation.
Keys cut.
You dey come and go.
I'm superstitious about sleeping in places where the furniture knows my weight, I said, and he gave that small laugh that says you're charming but I'm right. Think about it, he said. The roads at night. People texting. Deer with no respect for physics. I think about your safety because I like your work.
And because I like you.
There it was, the card he'd avoided throwing. I let it sit between us like an animal that might bite either of us if we moved too quickly. I'll think, I said. That part is true. He nodded, content to have planted a seed. He didn't know I was already planning which things I could carry if I had to leave in under 30 seconds. Wallet, notebook, one quilt top rolled tight, the paper bag with its pinch of leaves. Phone in drawer. At 5:30, the sky did that sudden dark Portland does in winter, and the house leaned into its trick of feeling like sanctuary. Victor set a cup down and then, instead of leaving, took a seat across from me. He said nothing. He didn't have to. I lifted the cup and let a teaspoon cross my tongue. He watched my throat. I coughed delicately like a woman who has remembered her manners. Then I stood to stretch, turned, and watered the philodendron with my hand still holding the cup. The plant licked its lips. His eyes flickered. If he had wanted a fight, he didn't take it. He stood. I'm going to run down to the dock, he said. The maintenance light has a stutter. When he left, the studio exhaled. I slipped my handkerchief under the rim of the cup and caught what I could, then rinsed the rest down the sink. My heart was doing little wing beats against my sternum. I wrote in the denim notebook with a hand that wanted to be steady. 6 p.m., sip. Observed swallow. Plant fed.
Enkerchief damp. No nap. Sauts cleriche.
At home, I left the phone in the kitchen drawer and sat on the floor, back to my bed, the way I used to sit in college when I didn't want to be tempted to lie down. I sorted my essentials into a canvas tote, ID, insurance card, a small tin of pins, cash, copy of my will that had not yet been updated to remove Hope as a beneficiary. I added the paper bag.
Yashide the tot behind the ironing board.
All logistics feel like bravery at 11 p.m. Maya called the landline at the community center and had the receptionist relay a message like we were living in 1993, midnight update. I walked over in my coat and accepted the phone like contraband. APS is looped in, she said.
Det.
Morales has a judge who doesn't love supplements masquerading as medicine. Warrant likely in the morning. Morales says if we can get you out clean, we do that. If we can't, they come in.
Nun, triunx.
There will be a cover. Vendor or lost tourist. You step or you stall.
Leave your phone.
If he brings a nurse again, smile. If he brings a locksmith to your life, say you'll think about it. Copy, I said, and felt absurd and alive using law enforcement monosyllables. Evelyn, she said, voice softening.
You redoins the hardest part. You're staying yourself.
I don't feel like myself, I said.
I feel like a woman playing me on TV.
That counts, she said. Acting buys time.
Time buy you adore.
I slept as if renting sleep by the hour, exact change only. Morning cracked like an egg into a pan. I brewed peppermint and ate dry toast because it's what you give your body when you need it to recognize you. I put on my teacher clothes and my studio shoes and my face that looks like I always mean to be patient. I slid my phone farther back in the drawer and put my tote near the door as if it were a normal tote doing normal tote work. At the lake, the perimeter felt tighter as only intuition can measure. Tom's drift had the faintest downhill to it, as if gravity had been adjusted. The studio chimed and chimed again. At 11, Victor offered an early lunch. I have a meeting at noon, he said.
I'll be in and out.
Okay, I said, because almost any word could be a trap and okay is a net with holes. At 11:50, the house got quiet in a way that wasn't absence, it was a holding of breath. Victor's footsteps faded.
Somewhere, adormait the soft metal qui s'affalach.
Tom's shadow thinned. Rain ticked against the glass in a rhythm that could have been a clock. I moved like a woman tidying. I put the cup in the sink. I folded the cloth.
I slid my tot under my chair.
And then, far off but crisp through the rain, a car horn spoke 3 times, short, short, short. It sounded like a joke. It sounded like a song I hadn't known I knew. I stood very still and let the shape of my day tilt toward the door. I looked at the kitchen drawer in my mind and saw my phone waiting like a patient spy. I looked at the window and saw the lake trying to be the sky.
I pu maillant flat on my sternum and counted 1, 2, 3.
Then I reached for my tote and for the cleanest version of my face. If I could step, I would step. If I could not, I would stall until Maya turned the door into a sentence that ended with us outside. The second set of 3 honks came quicker, as if the driver had changed their mind about subtlety. I stood, smoothed the cloth I didn't need to smooth, and picked up my tote the way you pick up your own hand.
The studio d'Ores little chim waited like a trois clearing. I didn't give it the satisfaction.
The glass wall slid open to the patio without a sound when I pushed the button, and for a heartbeat I saw myself reflected there, a woman with a sewing tote and a face arranged in polite concentration. The cameras blinked in their corners, green pinpricks winking patience. I moved along the glass like someone checking for smudges, then cut left where the hedge threw a strip of shade. The gravel was treacherous if you stepped as if you were sneaking. I stepped like a person going somewhere she'd always had the right to go. At the edge of the patio, a service path ran behind a line of rosemary and a long planter of philodendron cuttings, the same plants I'd been watering with theater. I kept the house at my shoulder and the hedge at my other shoulder until the path bent toward a small gate with a sign that said staff only as if suggesting, not commanding. Out front, a delivery van had pulled up sideways to the main drive, nose pointed toward the gate like a sheepdog gently penning. A woman in a yellow slicker stood in the rain with a clipboard, gesturing with an apologetic arc while Tom explained with his hands that this was not, in fact, a loading zone. The van horn chirped once, twice, 3 times as if it had a nervous tick. Maya stepped out from between the hedge and a storage shed so clean it might have lived off the floor. She wore a baseball cap and a rain jacket that turned her into a person you don't notice. "Blue quilt okay?" she said, not looking at me, as if we were 2 women trying not to bump umbrellas. "It's holding," I said, the phrase we'd agreed on if I was still myself. She slid a thin rectangle into my palm.
"No sim," she said.
"Receive only. Keep it off unless you need it." Then to the hedge door. The gate's latch had a little rust at the bottom where the rain liked to loiter. Maya pressed a folded strip of magnet next to the reed switch, the same kind of trick you use to keep a closet light off while you vacuum with the door open. The sensor thought the gate was closed. The chime inside the house, if it sounded at all, would call it an exhale. "Walk," Maya said. I walked. We slipped into the space between van and hedge.
The woman with the slické, dead.
Morales, I realized, her eyes too calm for a delivery driver, didn't turn. She kept Tom's attention the way a magician keeps yours while the other hand moves the coin. "It'll be 5 minutes," she said cheerfully, rain bouncing off her slicker like percussion. "Just a couple pallets, and then I'm a ghost." "Policy is policy," Tom said, politeness calcifying into procedure. He didn't look left. I didn't look right. We became our edges.
The van door slid open.
Inside, nothing looked like a police car. There were moving blankets, a dolly, a coil of rope the color of regret. I climbed in and crouched on the floor as if my spine knew the angle I needed to hold to be small and true. Maya followed.
The door closed.
The van's engine made the neutral little of a person humming in an elevator. Then we were moving, a slow arc that didn't insist on itself. No sirens.
Nos radios châtaient. Just rein en métal en maillon brise like an idle pulling a sim.
We turned once, twice. Someone's hand thumped twice on the partition, as if to say we'd passed a test. When the van stopped, it was under the low roof of a parking deck that smelled like damp concrete and old leaves. Maya opened the side door and put a hand on my elbow, not to steer me but to anchor. Safe center, she said. A sign near a door read something bland and kind, Family Resource Wing, so that anyone watching would think of diapers and parenting classes and not of triage. We went in. The lobby was small, a donation table with neatly folded blankets against one wall, a basket of granola bars, a whiteboard with the names of on-call advocates. The woman at the desk had a cardigan the color of oatmeal and a voice meant for triage. Evelyn, she said.
My name sounded like a life raft.
Yes, I said, my own voice wanting to crack, then deciding not to. She handed me a bottle of water, not tea, and a form with a pen tied to it by florist's ribbon. We'll keep paperwork light for now, she said. We have a room. If anyone asks, this is a resource center for caregivers. The cover wasn't just a cover, it was a truth. You can't run a city without fiction, but the best fiction is the kind that tells the truth and calls it another name. They put us in a small room with 2 chairs and a table and a box of tissues that didn't pretend to be discreet. The walls were a neutral that didn't ask anything of you. A bulletin board offered a language we'd both learned to speak: safety plan, boundaries, documentation. Det. Morales came in unzipping her slicker, hair damp at the ends. First, you did good, she said, without preamble. Second, we have a judge on standby. Third, we do this like we do everything, slow-looking, firm feet. I handed her the denim notebook. She didn't leaf through it quickly. She looked at it the way a midwife looks at a contraction, watching the shape, the duration, what the muscles were trying to say. You left your phone at home? She asked. In the kitchen drawer, I said. Under the measuring spoons. Perfect, she said. Fewer pings. We'll try to pull the admin profile data later from the vendor. Right now, we keep you off that grid. A nurse came in then, not Kendra with her slick corporate cheer, but a woman whose badge said OHSU and whose eyes knew what can be done to a body under the name of care. Blood draw, urine, hair if you consent, she said, not assuming the yes that so many people assume on your behalf. We're looking for antihistamines, benzodiazepine analogs, GABergic botanicals.
Timing meters.
We'll also document your baseline vitals and any neurosigns. Consent, I said and signed. She took the blood as if it were hers to borrow and promised to return the answer later. The urine she gave me privacy for. A small snip of hair she took from the back where it wouldn't announce itself. You may have rebound insomnia, she said gently.
You may feel floaty, wired, sad.
Sleep hygiene is your friend, light in the morning, screens down early, slow breaths that reach the bottom.
No new suppléments.
No old ones either. Maya squeezed my knee. I'll get you a lamp, she said. And a playlist that doesn't lie. An advocate named Irene came in with a clipboard that did not threaten and a calm that had practice. We have a safe apartment 2 blocks over, she said. Short term. No one's name on the buzzer. We can move you in this afternoon. I can run by your place with you if you need keys, clothes, anything. I have a tote, I said, which felt both hilarious and triumphant in the small way that triumph comes to women who plan like they breathe.
He left my phone.
That's a win, Irene said.
We'll get you à l'année.
Receive only. Pre-programmed with Maya and the center. If someone else calls, we don't answer.
Det.
Morales stepped back in, now with a man in plain clothes whose mustache looked like a career choice. APS is looped, she said. We're filing for a search warrant on the residence and the lab this afternoon. Patients, product, server, the works. If we can, we'll move on both at once. You will not be present. She said the last as if she were talking to a woman who might volunteer to carry the battering ram if they let her. I won't, I said, and then added, because the part of me that wanted to help could not help itself. On his desk, there's a caddy of teas with hand labels. Chamomilla is a decoy. The tin by the kettle in the studio is what he's used on me. Good, she said, writing it down. Anything that helps us put names to what's in the jar helps the judge not roll her eyes. Maya's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and then at me. First panel's back, she said. Prelim shows doxylamine-like signatures plus passionflower and skullcap. It's a cocktail designed to help you sleep and make your day nap-friendly. Not illegal in a wellness store. Illegal when you don't tell people what you're giving them and when you isolate them to make it easy. Consent without information isn't consent, Irene said, not looking up from her clipboard. It was like hearing a chorus sing a line you've been trying to hum on your own. We moved then the way a good team moves furniture, quickly, quietly, no wasted motion. Irene drove me 2 blocks in a car that smelled like Lysol and lemon. The apartment was on the second floor of a building that had learned to mind its own business. Inside, a twin bed with a duvet someone had washed with lavender, a table, a lamp that understood light, a small kitchen where the kettle looked like a cousin and not a stranger. Sheets are clean, Irene said. There are towels. If you need anything after 6, there's a number by the phone that rings to a real person.
If you can't sleep, don't wrestle the bed. Sit by the window.
The city will carry some of it for you. Maya set a bag on the table, sweats, socks, a clean t-shirt. From my trunk, she said. The fashion is devastating, but it fits. Her phone buzzed again, a text that read from an unknown number we both knew was Morales's moving, stand by.
Another 10 minutes, then another, inside.
My throat went desert dry. The third text took longer. My stomach tried to fold in on itself like paper. Then, secured. Maya exhaled in the way people exhale when they've been holding their breath for someone else. They're in, she said. They have the house. I sat on the bed I would sleep in and didn't sleep. I watched the rain find new paths down the glass and tried to match my breathing to nothing but my own counting. 30 minutes later, Morales texted again, lab next. Then, because apparently even cops share a flair for theater, a single word, harvested. Servers, Maya translated. They got the logs.
Hydrant quater.
I wrote in the notebook because rituals make treacherous days survivable.
Nun, triunx. Patio. Edge. Get.
Magnet.
Van. Room, neutral, kind.
Blood, urine, hair.
Irene, qui.
Lamp, warm.
Word, consent, contrôle.
As afternoon gave itself to evening, Morales sent impulses of language to cut the waiting into pieces. Transport. Booked. Hold. It wasn't poetry, but it was the closest thing to music I'd heard all day. When night came, it didn't ask my permission. It just came. I lay on my side and watched the ceiling fan do its slow choreography and thought of the file with my name and the dash. The dash had felt like an arrow when I stared at it in Victor's office. Here, in a room that smelled faintly of lavender and lemon, the dash looked more like a bridge. It wasn't over it yet. But I could see the other side, and for the first time in too long, I could imagine walking there with both hands empty. Night stretched thin, but it held. I lay on the twin bed in the safe apartment and counted the ceiling fan's slow rotations like stitches. Every so often my loaner phone, receive only, the quiet cousin of a phone, buzzed with a single word from Morales, transport. Booked. Hold. It was a language simple enough to live inside when your own words were glass. When sleep came, it was shallow, a rowboat tied to a dock. I drifted, bumped, drifted again. I woke twice with the sensation I'd left a stove on in another life. In the morning, I made peppermint in the small kettle and stood by the window to let the light tell my brain what it needed to be told. Day. Maya knocked once and came in with the key like a paramedic, efficient, soft-handed. You look like someone who survived a flood and is pretending she went for a swim, she said, not unkindly. I've worn worse metaphors, I said. We walked the 2 blocks to the safe center. Irene was there with a clipboard and a face already halfway through a day's griefs and mercies. Blood and hair are at the lab, she said. Urine's moving faster. OHSU expects prelims by noon. We'll also get you in front of a doc to check your nervous system and give you a plan for the next few nights. Plan, I said, tasting the word. I like plans that involve lamps. Lamps are on the menu, she said. And water. And food that remembers its food. In a small exam room, a physician with tired kindness in her posture introduced herself as Dr. Venkataraman. I'll ask a handful of rude questions, she said. Then I'll let you be a person again. She checked my pupils, my reflexes, the steadiness of my fingers over an invisible piano. 3 words, now and later, she said. Apple, rivet, grès. I repeated them and held them in my mouth like hard candy while she reviewed my chart. If what we suspect is in your system, you may feel a wired sleepiness, a paradox that makes sense only from the inside. You may dream more vividly. You may feel your short-term memory slosh. We'll help structure your days. Morning light, gentle movement, regular meals, no naps until you know you're choosing them. Breathing that goes all the way down. Apple river grey, I said when she asked again a few minutes later. Good, she said.
Your brain knows how to hold on.
When we came back to the small interview room, Morales was already there with a folder and coffee she didn't bring for me. He's booked, she said. House and lab yielded what we hoped. Basement had equipment that doesn't live in basements unless people are doing work they don't want UPS to know about. Servers gave us batch logs, schedules, names coded in ways computers think are clever and humans find obvious. Your photographs line up. My throat did its dry trick. The files.
In your word, Elena, Doris, Nina, she said.
We'll notify families. APS has 3 older cases flagged with similar patterns. Right now, we need to fix the timeline.
From first contact to at you drank yesterday.
Think of it as cutting a pattern that lets the court sew the rest. I opened the denim notebook. The handwriting looked steadier than I felt. Starting at the market, the thermos, the first sip.
The greenhouse, the bright blend. The l'Ecoswego studio, the camera, the chim.
The Guardian phone profile.
The door sensor in my apartment.
The nurse in sea blue scrubs. Kendra, I said. She had hands that assumed yes. Morales's pen paused. Kendra last name? I didn't get it, I said. She said consultant. We'll find her, Morales said. For now, objects. Let's put names on the tools. She slid photographs across the table, grey cabinet, tins by a kettle, a caddy of teas. Which of these was the blend he gave you most often? The unlabeled tin, I said, tapping it. By the kettle in the studio. The chamomilla jar is a decoy. This bottle here, he started bringing it for the weekend when he wanted to increase how much the weekend belonged to him. And the cameras? In the corners of the studio, I said.
Green pinprique.
Not pointed out at the world. Pointed in. Morales's nod was slow and satisfied. We have the logs. The system was set to flag movement at specific times, his times.
8, 1, 6.
The software is clever enough to call it wellness. The law is clever enough to call it what it is.
What happened now?
I asked. The question carried every version of now I could imagine. Booking, initial appearance, charges, she said. State for sure. Possibly federal, depending on lab cross-state commerce and misbranding. An AUSA is already warming up. Meanwhile, you get a protection order.
Media will circle.
We'll route them away. If they catch you, you say, no comment, I'm focusing on my health, and you walk. Your job is to keep breathing, keep writing, keep saying what you saw when we ask you in rooms with recorders. She slid a printout of the protection order across the table. Names, boxes, a restraining distance measured in feet and sanity. It felt like iron in my hands and like gauze. He won't contact you, Morales said. If he does, we'll make sure it costs him. Maya leaned back, her eyes not leaving my face. I'm going to get you a light box, she said. It will be ugly and it will save your mornings. And I'm going to set your loaner phone to do not disturb with a hole only big enough for me and the safe center. If you want Carol in, we can add her once we get her number off your old phone without inviting trouble. She'll forgive me the delay, I said. And then she'll threaten to scalpel him with a pair of gingers. Good friends are violent about the right things, Irene murmured, making another note. By noon, the first lab calls came back. Dr. Venkataraman knocked softly and stepped in. Urine shows doxylamine analogues, she said. Blood has trace antihistamines consistent with repeated low doses. Hair will give us the arc. If you'd been in a hospital study, we'd call it subtherapeutic. In the wild, with concealment and isolation, It's enough to soften day into felt.
And the herb?
Maya asked. Passion flower skullcap, the doctor said. Maybe chamomile to keep the mask on.
Nothing illegal alone.
In combination, without informed consent, with surveillance and restriction, this is a different beast. We'll write it plain for the DA. We'll underline informed. She looked at me. When you feel the urge to nap today, call someone instead.
Let a human interrupt the habit.
After she left, Morales held up another photograph, a screenshot of a spreadsheet with my initials next to tidy rows of dates and doses. This, she said, is the rhythm he tried to make you keep. Everything looks tidy in columns, I said. Then you remember there's a person folded inside. We'll make sure the jury remembers, she said, and I believed her because I needed to, and because her eyes didn't blink too much when she promised things. We broke for food. The Safe Center's kitchen had a bowl of clementines, peanut butter, bread that was pretending to be as good as bread used to be. I made a sandwich with care, as if sandwiches could be liturgy. Irene sat with me and did not fill silence with helpfulness. We have a support group that meets Thursdays, she said after a while.
Coercive control.
Nothing you don't already know.
But the knowing gelude when other women say it with you.
I'll come, I said. I meant it, even if my body would balk when Thursday came. In the afternoon, we did the long interview, the timeline with timestamps and sensory details, the smell of the blends, the warmth behind ears, the wobble of air over a stove when I stood too fast. I talked about the way he watched my throat when I swallowed, about the door sensor's ding changing the music of my home, about the pocket-sized betrayals that accreted into a wall. Morales didn't hurry me. She kept us in a gear where memory could catch without grinding. Your language is clean, she said when we finished.
Keep it clean.
The defense will want you to sound hysterical. They can't argue with the sound of a woman taking inventory.
What about tomorrow?
I asked. We'll ask you back to the house for a controlled walkthrough, she said. Not alone.
Note à surprise. Under lights. You show us the kettle, the tin, the shim, the corner of the ceiling where the green light blink.
We make pictures that mean the same thing to strangers they mean to you. She left us then, and the room felt briefly like something else, a place where paper lives heavier than air.
Maya gatred or things.
Apple River Grey? She asked. Apple River Grey, I said, and felt absurdly proud. Back at the apartment, evening arrived wearing the clothes of afternoon.
He set the light box on the table for morning like a good student. He texted Irene from the Loane phone, made it back, okay for now.
She sent back a thumbs up and a small sentence that felt like a hand on my back, call if your breath gets shallow. It did once, around 10, for no reason except a body used to being interrupted. I put my feet on the floor and sat by the window with the blinds tilted just enough to see a slice of street. A man walked a dog that had never learned to mind puddles.
A bus siged.
Somewhere upstairs, someone laughed at a show that thinks it's funny. I breathed like the quilts taught me, in on the lift, out on the stitch. The urge to nap passed, which startled me by arriving at night. I drank water, ate a clementine with unnecessary attention, and wrote in the notebook, today, under lights later Morales, firm feet, Irene key lamp, Dr. V, Apple River Grey. When sleep found me, it found me doing a small thing right. In the dream I had, I wasn't back at the market or in the lake house. I was in a room with women and cloth. We were teaching each other a stitch, sloppy at first and then less so. Someone said, you keep the breath.
The stitch will follow.
It was either my voice or all of ours. I woke before dawn, and for once that didn't feel like a theft. The light would come, and I would stand in rooms with folders and lights and say true things in simple sentences. The dash after my name had begun to look less like an arrow and more like a place for a stitch to land. Tomorrow, I would pull it through.
Morning came like a key argument and he let the light box win.
20 minutes with my face in the artificial dawn, peppermint steam lifting, the notebook open to a page I hadn't filled yet. When Morales arrived, she had that set to her shoulders that says she's already spent a few promises and kept them. Walk through, she said.
Under varan, under light, under control.
We drove in an unmarked car that smelled like coffee and legal pads. At the gate, uniforms made the gestures of authority without the theater. The house felt different with strangers in it. The chime still announced us, ding, but the sound landed on tape measures, evidence flags, camera tripods. A photographer snapped the entry as if it were a portrait of a room that had always been hoping to be seen. "Show me what we need," Morales said. We started where my days had been taught to bend. The studio's north light was the same indifferent friend. In the corners, the black eyes with green pinpricks watched the forensic lens watch them back. "There," I said, pointing. "And there. Their eyes blink when you move." The tech nodded, already marking model numbers.
Morale gesture tous d'or. Chim.
I opened and closed it. Ding. The sound seemed smaller now that it had an audience. "The kettle," I said, crossing to the sink. The tin sat where it always sat, unlabeled and casual, a villain in plain clothes. The chamomilla jar smiled its Latin smile from the shelf like a decoy duck. "This was your blend," Morales said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I said. The lab team wanted a clean chain of custody. I didn't touch anything. They swabbed the lid, the handle, the counter. Someone read the serial number off the smart kettle to subpoena its usage logs, because in this century even kettles keep diaries. Morales looked toward the ceiling and then back to me. "Times 816, I said. He called it steady. My body called it a schedule.
"We walked the perimeter at my request."
He kept me on the path, I said. Kindly. Always kindly. Tom's shadow fell here. We paused where the rosemary hedge made a clean green line and the staff-only gate pretended to ask politely. The latch still wore its rust in the corners, the place the magnet had tricked the reed switch into singing yes when the door said no. Inside, in the main wing, I pointed out the little dumb door sensor twins he'd pressed onto my apartment door. "That ding changes the music of a home," I said, and the younger tech wrote it down exactly like that. The office was what it had been, a working room that believed in paper. The gray cabinet had a numbered evidence tag now, and the lock lay on a white cloth like a bad tooth. "You already have the files," I said. "I don't need to see them again." "Good," Morales said. "You don't. The photographs you took are admissible, ours complete the set."
Downstairs, the air changed.
The basement had shrugged off any pretense at domestic usefulness. Under fluorescence, the machines looked patient and bored, a dryer that wasn't for clothes, a blender that wasn't for soup, a heat sealer with a mouth like a coin purse. Shelves held amber bottles without labels, only numbers, the way secrets prefer to dress. The forensics team moved through it all like a dance company in white coveralls, each gesture with a reason. "Not a hospital," Morales said.
Not a garage.
"A place to do chemistry no one audits." On a workbench, a laptop wore a sticker that read "Live a Little" and a login prompt that had already yielded to someone who knows how to knock politely and hard. A screen showed tidy rows of dates and codes. Even from across the room I could see the pattern, 3 columns that met the day at 8:16. "He called it wellness," I said.
Ici à métronome.
"Juries understand metronomes," Morales said. "We'll teach them to hear it." She left me by the stairs while she and the AUSA on the case, Rachel Kim, all sharp eyes and hair pulled back with missionary conviction, conferred about the FTC and the FDA and which statutes sing when supplements go feral. "Interstate commerce is our friend," I heard Kim say. "You ship across state lines, you invite the feds to the party." She glanced over at me and softened her voice half a shade.
Sorry tout au clos like a sport.
"Call it a stitch," I said.
You're pulling something true.
Upstairs again, I stood in the studio while the photographer put a measuring tape under the kettle, then under the camera in the corner, then under the door sensor, every object contextualized, every claim backed by inches and perspective. "We make pictures that mean the same to strangers as they mean to you," the photographer said. He'd done this before. On our way out, noise outlived the moment. Media had gathered at the far end of the drive, a respectful distance enforced by sawhorses and a polite officer with a jaw like a story about discipline. Microphones angled themselves at the air. Someone shouted my name like they were throwing a rope. I kept my eyes on the hood of Morales's car. Victor emerged from the side entrance at the same time, bracketed by 2 deputies. He wore the day like a good suit, fitted, controlled. His hands were cuffed in front because some counties still pretend at dignity. For a heartbeat the path of our bodies ran parallel. He looked at me the way a man looks at a dog he expects to sit. "Evelyn," he said, voice low enough not to feed the microphones but loud enough to make my name weigh something. I wanted to help. I helped you sleep. I didn't stop walking. Help without truth is control, I said, not for the cameras, not for the record, but because I needed the air to have heard it once. Kim sidestepped to block any further exchange. A reporter asked if Hale Botanica would be shut down. Another asked whether the city had blood on its hands for letting supplements masquerade as medicine. Morales got me into the car with the kind of efficiency that comes from practice, not impatience. The door closed, and the world's noise became a picture. Back at the safe center, Maya had the news on low. Every channel had a different version of what had just happened. One led with a montage of the lab equipment under a Chiron about wellness gone wrong. Another chose Hale's charitable gala photos, Victor in a tuxedo near a mayor's lapel flower. A toxicologist with kind hands explained antihistamines and GABA. A bioethicist explained informed consent as if it were a spoon anyone should know how to use. This is the danger with supplements, the toxicologist said. They're regulated like food, not like drugs. You can sell a dream in a bottle, and unless you lie on the label or add a prescription agent, the FDA mostly watches from the bleachers. But consent is not a loophole. You still have to tell people what you're giving them. Consent is a choreography, the ethicist added. Information, capacity, voluntariness. If you isolate someone and alter their cognition and restrict their communication, you have broken the dance. Maya muted the TV. It's blunt, she said. But the right blunt. Morales came by with a folder and the look of someone briefly satisfied that her tools had been well used. Hair analysis confirms long-term exposure, she said. Your blood matches the pattern of repeated low doses. The server logs show batches labeled Artisan S and Artisan N with timestamps that match your notebook. The app vendor reports an MDM profile installed from a corporate account belonging to Hale Botanica. The insurer confirmed a policy taken out in your name with him as beneficiary, filed by a broker who likes nice restaurants. My stomach did a small flip at that last one. Insurance, I said. Pending scenario. Kim called in on speaker, her voice clear and busy. We're charging on the state side first: elder abuse, unlawful administration of a substance, attempted insurance fraud, surveillance and stalking enhancements. If the lab yields what we think, we add homicide charges for the prior victims. Federal charges are in the wings if the supplement misbranding lines up. I'll need your clean narrative when we prep you. Short sentences. You're good at those. I've been practicing, I said. Breath. Stitch. Time. Keep those, Kim said. Juries live in kitchens and they sew hems. We hung up. Irene came with lasagna that had learned how to be comfort without being platitude. We have a group tonight, she said. You don't have to speak. I won't probably, I said. Elle bring maillon. In the hour between lasagna and women in folding chairs, I wrote a list, the way I'd been taught to list a quilt's materials on a show card. What I can say in one breath. He offered tea at 8, 1, and 6. He watched my throat when I swallowed. He put a chime on my door and called it safety. He gave me a phone that shrank my world and called it care. He named it wellness. My body called it a schedule.
What the room can say.
The kettle, the tin, the cameras pointed in.
The door sans serait digne. The fil with my name and a dash.
The logs with their tidy rows. The basement that doesn't launder socks.
What the expert can say.
Antihistamine derivatives, passion flower, skullcap. Blood and hair like rings in a tree. Consent requires truth you can hold in your mouth. I practiced the last line until my mouth knew exactly where the words lived. When the women came, they sat in their metal chairs and looked at the carpet until someone looked up. Irene opened with a sentence that had been knitted by many hands. Tell us your border, she said. Tell us where it got moved. I didn't speak. Not yet. I held the list in my lap like a piece of fabric not quite ready to be cut. After group, back in the apartment, I set the light box for morning and my loaner phone on Do Not Disturb with only 2 holes. I folded the day and put it with the others. Before sleep, I said the 3 words Dr. V had given me. Apple, rivet, grès. Then I added 3 of my own.
Brice, stitch, time.
The dash after my name was still a dash, but it had company now, commas, periods, the grammar of a life returning to itself. Tomorrow would be for the courtroom's light and the hard chairs and the microphones. Tonight was for the small practice of telling one true thing and letting it rest in the room without apology. The morning of court, I let the light box do its work and ironed my blouse the way you press a seam flat so it will remember what you asked it to do. Maya watched me check my hem with the concentration I reserve for tight corners. Apple River Grey, she said. Apple River Grey, I answered, and added my own 3 under my breath.
Brice, Stitch, Time.
The Multnomah County Courthouse smelled like wood polish and nerves. In the corridor outside the assigned courtroom, microphones waited with their mouths open. Morales found us, a piece of calm in a suit. Look at me if the room tries to take you, she said. If you don't know an answer, say you don't know. If you need water, ask. Short sentences. You've been practicing. Inside, the jury box looked like a quilt top that hadn't been bound yet. 12 faces, different fabrics, arranged by a logic only the quilter and fate know. Victor sat at the defense table in a suit the color of a storm that knows where to go. He looked the way he always looked, composed. The cuffed hands were gone, replaced by a legal pad and a pen he didn't seem to use. The judge entered and the room made the sound bodies make when they stopped rustling. Be seated, he said. The clerk swore us all into the reality that words have weight in here. I watched other people testify first. A forensic tech set out the machines from the basement on poster boards as if arranging saints on an altar: dryer, blender, heat sealer, the copper tub that looked like a bathtub for secrets. He explained how the unlabeled tin by the kettle matched the product labeled artisaness in the server logs, dated and time-stamped like a confession. The app vendor testified about the mobile device management profile on my phone, installed by a Hale Botanica corporate account. The insurer explained the policy taken out in my name with Victor listed as beneficiary, premiums auto-drafted from a shell account at a bank that likes tall glass. Dr. Venkataraman took the stand and turned pharmacology into sentences a tired brain can catch. Doxylamine analogues and sedating botanicals, she said. Repeated low doses. Short-acting effects that feel like relaxation. Cumulative effects that feel like a life getting quieter without consent. She talked about GABA, about antihistamines, about the way passion flower and skullcap put arms around your day. None of these are illegal alone, she said. The method is the crime. When they called me, my feet did what my feet are supposed to do. I stood, swore, sat. The prosecutor, Patel with Kim's second chair, smiled the way you do when you'd rather put a blanket over a witness than a spotlight. Ms. Hart, she said. How did you meet the defendant? At the Portland Saturday Market, I said. He watched me stitch. He said he worked with rhythms. And did he offer you anything? Tea, I said. Once, at the market. Later, at his greenhouses. After that, on a schedule in his studio, 8, 1, and 6. Did he ever tell you what was in it? He called it a blend, I said. He said his grandmother taught him to listen. When I asked about ingredients, he said trade secret, and nothing I wouldn't give my mother. Describe the house, Patel said. Glass, lake, cameras pointed in, I said.
Achimons the studio d'or.
A path he called safe. A gate that asked you to be staff. He suggested a phone for my safety. The phone made my world smaller while telling me it was making it safer.
What happened to your body when you drank the tea?
My hands slowed, I said. That part one liked. Then my afternoon folded. I'd blink and lose 20 minutes. The air would wobble like heat above a stove. I missed calls I didn't know I'd missed. Did the defendant watch you drink? He watched my throat, I said. He set the cup down and stayed until he saw me swallow. When I coughed into a handkerchief, he relaxed.
We walked through the photo of the cabinet, the way you walk through a house you used to live in.
Patel held up the file with my name on it. Is this yours? It's a file about me, I said.
First contact. Initiate low dose.
Digital isolation, Guardian mode deploy October 14th. Increase 15% if suspicion subsides, maintain at 10% if niece presence persists.
Final stage scénario.
Insurance pending. Did you consent to receive these substances? No, I said.
Consent without information isn't consent.
What did you do when you discovered the files? I photographed them. I sent them to my niece.
Il left my phone at home.
I walked out through a gate that didn't want me to leave and got into a van that did.
Patel let the smile show.
When did you learn what you were drinking? When Dr. V told me, I said. When Maya said the words antihistamine derivatives. When my body said, this isn't mine. She sat. The judge turned to the defense. The defense attorney stood as if a string had lifted him. His voice was a warm river looking for a bank to flood. Ms. Hart, you're 58. Do you agree memory changes with age? Yes, I said. So does judgment. You enjoyed better sleep when drinking the defendant's tea? I enjoyed quiet, I said. Later I learned what it cost. You say he isolated you, he said. Isn't it true he gave you a phone to protect you from scammers? Isn't it true he offered you a room to make your life easier? Isn't it true he drove you during storms? It is true he offered things, I said. Help without truth is control. He moved on, as if he just bumped a table and hoped no one noticed. You could have said no. You did say no sometimes to full cups, correct? I said no and then found my world had fewer doors, I said. It's easier to say no when the windows are open and the phone rings. He tried a smile. You're quite the orator.
Iseo, he said. Il earned tous ses cinq sens.
He asked whether I had personal grudges, whether I'd been influenced by television, whether social media amplified my fear. I told him I don't do grudges or social media and that television is funnier on the radio. He asked if I had ever been diagnosed with anxiety. I said grief is not a diagnosis, and that even if it were, it doesn't negate arithmetic. 816. When he sat, the judge gave me the water I hadn't asked for. You can step down, he said, and I did, like someone who has walked over a river in winter and knows how to listen for the crack. The rest of the trial lived in a different gear. Closing arguments arrived the following week like weather systems. Patel stood in front of the jury and stacked her bricks carefully, the metronome of doses, the chime, the cameras, the phone, the files that used the word scenario next to the word insurance, the lab reports that turned trade secret into a recipe you could not call love. Care increases your world, she said. Control shrinks it. He shrank it. He wrote it down. The defense told the jury about wellness, about his client's philanthropy, about how we used to trust grandmother's kitchens. They said the state wanted to criminalize kindness and paperwork. They said I'd found meaning in coincidences and fear in good intentions. Reasonable doubt, they said, the way you say a spell when the room has stopped believing in the magic. The judge read instructions the way you read a pattern aloud, so no one blames the fabric. Then we waited. I went back to the safe center and watered Irene's office plant and did not nap.
Maya checked my light box like a nurse check a drip. Moral texted ons, jury like column. Kim texted, Brett. Stitch.
Time. They called us back the next afternoon. The jury filed in the way people file into church on a day that matters. The foreperson looked at the paper in his hands like it might jump. His voice shook and then didn't. On the counts of unlawful administration of a substance, guilty. On the counts of elder abuse, guilty. On the counts of insurance fraud, guilty. On the counts related to electronic surveillance and stalking, guilty. On the homicide counts tied to the prior victims, guilty. The phrase aggravating factors hung in the room like winter. Victor didn't look at me. He stared at a spot near the judge's left shoulder as if he could bridle it. The judge set sentencing for 3 weeks and ordered him remanded. The room exhaled, then inhaled its own noise, a muffled sob somewhere behind me, a reporter's pen scratching, the small click of someone's jaw being unclenched. In the hall, microphones gathered like moths. Ms. Hart, how do you feel? Someone asked, as if feelings were coins you could hand out. I said, I can breathe. Maya put her hand between me and the rest of the questions and we walked, not fast, not slow, as if we were leaving a church that had done its work. Sentencing came with a kind of gravity I hadn't expected. The judge spoke to the room about care and control, about how the law has a duty to call something by its right name. He handed down a term long enough to fill the rest of Victor's life with institutional time, plus prohibitions and forfeitures that sounded like doors closing and locks turning. This was not medicine, he said. This was manipulation in the language of care. The court declines to be fluent in it. After, at the safe center, Irene poured coffee like it mattered, and it did. We sat at a square table and looked at one another and at the plants she somehow kept alive under fluorescent light. "What will you do now?" she asked. "Pack light," I said. "Find a place where the mornings are honest. Teach my hands to be useful to other hands." "North Carolina has a community," Maya said.
Asheville.
"Quilting, fiber arts, mountains that change you without asking." I pictured a studio with windows that didn't try to be a lake. Women in folding chairs who became women at tables. A sign on a door that didn't need to be a secret to be kind.
Brice, stitch, time.
"I'll go," I said, hearing my own voice the way you hear a needle pass cleanly through 3 layers at once.
I'll take the lightbox and the notebook and a bolt of something you haven't cut yet.
That night, in the safe apartment that had taught my nerves a new grammar, I packed what mattered into a suitcase that didn't creak. I wrote one last note on the page I'd kept for endings.
Today, verdict.
Words, care increases your world.
Acte, Brett. Plan, go.
I turned off the light box and lay down. Sleep came like a clean seam, and in the dream a line of women passed a needle hand to hand across a table, not to mend a tear this time, but to begin a new piece. The dash after my name wasn't an arrow anymore. It was a place where the next sentence would start. Asheville met me with mountains that looked like folded cloth. The Blue Ridge held its breath in long blue pleats, and the French Broad River ran with the imperturbable confidence of water that has known stones a long time. I rented a corner of an old mill building whose brick had learned to mind its own business. The windows were tall, the light came honest. I set a kettle on a 2-burner stove, unpacked my light box and my denim notebook, and hung a hand-painted sign on the door, Second Wind Studio. The first days were all ritual.
Before dawn. Peppermint.
20 minutes of artificial morning, while the real one considered its options. I walked to the farmer's market and bought eggs with feathers, still thinking about the chickens, apples that kept their names. I threaded a needle and told it, as I always do, to walk true. On the wall above the pressing table I taped a card with 6 words in a tidy line: care increases your world. Breathe.
Stitch.
Time. On Tuesdays and Thursdays I unlocked for class. My first 4 students arrived the way people do when they aren't sure if they belong, apologizing with their eyes and their hands. Ruth was a retired nurse who missed being needed but not being told she was needed. Jamie had driven down from a college he wasn't sure he would finish, looking for a place where his hands didn't have to pretend. Anna baked bread that made men cry and wanted to sew a table runner that wouldn't embarrass her grandmother. Marisol, a veteran, said little and threaded fast. "We'll start with 9 patches," I said. "The patchwork unit that doesn't punish you for learning." I showed the backstitch, the way the thread nestles when you respect the pause. We made rules so light you could wear them: no phones on the table, you choose what your mouth says and how much of you comes with it, tea is peppermint or nothing until a doctor tells you otherwise. We breathed, we stitched. On Saturdays I pushed the tables into a loose circle and called it a workshop because people are funny about circles. Breath, stitch, time, the flyer said.
Bring a small on project.
Bring nothing if you need to. Bring yourself if you can. Some weeks the room held 6, some weeks it held 2 and a silence that did not accuse. When someone cried, the person to her right poured water and the person to her left passed the box of tissues like a relay baton. When someone laughed, we checked that the laugh belonged to her and not to the old habit of preemptive apology. Maya came the second weekend and once a month after. She taught a short session on boundaries with a pen and a flip chart, words like doors, ask, inform, wait, respect, no. She set up a lamp in the corner with a timer and a note that said, "Morning is medicine, free and stubborn." She walked the river with me and we counted dogs. At night she checked that the light box's blue was the blue we wanted, not the blue that steals dreams. The studio smelled like steam and cloth. Between classes I stitched on a quilt I called Threading the Light, indigo triangles meeting a river of pale linen that refused to be straight. On the back, in white thread so small you had to want to see it, I stitched 3 names where the batting could keep them warm: Helena, Doris, Nina. No plaque. No label. Some things don't need to be pointed at as much as held.
The first big argument came from the radio.
A local station ran a series on wellness and consent, and they asked if I would come. I sat in a room that smelled like coffee and microphones and told my story in sentences that wore plain clothes. The host was kind. The calls were not all kind. My wife slept for the first time in years on a supplement, a man said, the protective edge in his voice like a piece of glass you don't want to cut yourself on. Aren't you just making it harder for people who help? I am asking for truth, I said. If the door is locked from the outside and you tell me it's for my safety, I need to know who has the key. Help increases my world.
Contrôle shrinkit.
The difference is not a feeling. It is a practice. Another caller asked how someone as old as I am could be so foolish. I said that loneliness and hope share a cupboard and reach for the same cups. I said there's no age at which consent stops needing information. The host let the silence after that sentence sit long enough to be useful. In November I hung quilts for a small show and called it Threading the Light. The town came, because towns like to gather when there is cloth and cookies. I wrote the price list by hand. I put a jar on the table that said, proceeds go to the county's domestic violence shelter and to APS's emergency fund. A woman in a blue cardigan traced a seam with her finger and didn't look up when she said, my sister isn't ready to leave. Will this make her ready? No, I said. Readiness isn't a gift I can wrap for her. Bring her peppermint. Sit with her in the morning light. Help her write what happens and when. Help her widen her world inch by inch. A girl of 12 came with her father and wanted to learn to sew a sampler. We made one together, squares with words in white thread on white cloth. Ask. Inform. Wait. Respect no. She added one of her own in block letters so careful they made my throat feel large. Believe me. We hung the sampler near the door.
Letters found me.
Irene from the Safe Center wrote that the Thursday group had birthed 2 spin-offs, one for women who weren't ready to talk but wanted to sit in rooms where no one moved the furniture, one for women who wanted to write letters to themselves from 6 months in the future. Morales sent a copy of a press release I didn't read past the headline because justice documents always smell faintly of paper and fatigue. The daughter of Helena wrote on lined paper, I knew something was wrong and I didn't know where to point the knowing. Thank you for pointing. She didn't ask me to write back, I didn't. Sometimes the answer is doing the next part of your work. Winter came without asking anyone's permission. The mountains turned from blue to gray in the afternoons, the studio got generous with wool. I taught binding with a patience I'd earned. A man from the university invited me to speak in a lecture hall about coercive control and craft. In the front row a young man with a beard asked if we weren't demonizing wellness. I said I love wellness that tells me its name and lets me leave with my own. He didn't argue with that. He wrote it down. Carol called one night from Portland on a line that didn't drop. I saw the photos, she said.
You look less haunted.
I look tired, I said. But it's mine. I'm coming east in the spring, she said. I'll bring yarn, which you will pretend to tolerate. Bring yourself, I said.
Bring your crew.
Maya's telehealth check-ins became something like gossip with a syllabus. We kept a standing appointment on Sunday afternoons.
Aptite? She'd ask.
Light. I'd answer with numbers and with metaphors. When sleep went ragged, which it did, on an irregular schedule I learned to forgive, we adjusted the lamps and the walks and the water. I didn't drink anything I couldn't pronounce. I didn't install anything on my phone I hadn't asked her to be cynical about. By spring the studio had an alcove with a couch that could hold a tired back and a shelf with books that told the truth gently. We started a community project, a consent sampler the size of a full bed. Each person made one block, a word, a line, a boundary. Some were crooked and stayed crooked, some were perfect and asked to be roughed up. We stitched them together with sashing the color of early morning. When we hung it, the wall looked like it had decided to be a friend. I wrote at night, a long essay that kept wanting to be a book and kept insisting it would only go where truth could follow. Thread of Consent, I called it, because I am not the clever kind of clever and because clarity often lives in the plain nouns. The library let me read in the room where the ceiling fans pretend to be palm fronds. I stood behind a lectern and told a story about breath and stitch and time and a kettle that kept a diary. In the back row a woman who had not taken off her coat clutched the straps of her bag and didn't cry and didn't leave. When it was over, she didn't come up to me. She walked out with her head still on her shoulders. Not all work happens where you can see it. On the anniversary of the verdict, I took the quilt with the white thread names off the wall and shook it in the cold air. I said each name aloud, not as an incantation but as a promise that mouths matter. I added a fourth name, small as the others, Evelyn.
Note tout mémorialisme.
to remind me that I am among the living and accountable to them. Second Wind Studio learned the shape of a week. Tuesdays for 9 patches. Thursdays for binding and something that looked like relief.
Saturday for circle.
On a Wednesday now, and then I taped a sign to the door that said, closed for walking. I went to the river.
I counted dogs.
I practiced being a person whose day doesn't fold without her permission. Sometimes a stranger stood in the doorway and hovered. I learned to say, you can come in and sit without paying. Some did. Some didn't. One afternoon a man my age with hands that shook asked if he could make a pillow for his wife. She doesn't sleep, he said. I thought maybe if she had something I made. We cut squares from an old shirt of his. We stitched. He cried and didn't apologize for crying. I didn't tell him what to put in his wife's tea. I told him when to put the pillow under her head. When spring tipped into summer, the mountains pulled their blue back on. The river remembered who it had been in April and forgave June for being different. On a day so clear it felt like a door, I taught backstitch to a room half full of beginners. Each stitch is a breath, I said, not because it is pretty, though it is, but because it keeps being true.
If you keep the breath, the stitch will follow.
After class, I turned the light box off and set tomorrow's kettle by the stove. I wiped the table with a cloth that smells like lemon, which is the right kind of pretend. I locked the door and stood on the landing for a minute to watch the last light lie down on the river. The dash after my name, the one in the file in another state, the one in my mouth when I say it alone, no longer felt like an arrow aimed at a plan I hadn't agreed to. It felt like a place to land a stitch. It felt like room. Care increases your world. I had made mine bigger, inch by careful inch, with thread I could see and sentences I could carry. Then I went home and slept, not because someone had made me quiet, but because I had chosen to be.